Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We know this is a big ask. This is a very busy time of year for teachers and TLFs and educators in general, and we really appreciate you prioritizing coming to this session and taking time out of your very busy day. There are a couple of links for you in the chat. One is to our slide deck, and the other is to our sign-in form. We will be recording this presentation because we want to make sure it's accessible to educators and TLFs who were not able to attend live. But this is just a reminder that when you are placed into breakout rooms, you will not be recorded during that time. It'll just be kind of the whole group time that's recorded. So let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to SEL, or Social Emotional Learning in Literature. My name is Anna Kay, and I'm with my amazing colleague, Molly Keys. Oop, I skipped ahead, Molly. We'll go back to the last slide. I got so excited to announce us. But we are going to ask that you make sure that you sign in on the Google form that was placed into the chat. That's going to help us keep track of our attendance. Those numbers are really important to us to report back to our supervisors and various shareholders in our department. It's also to make sure that you get credit for being here. So please take a moment to either scan that QR code or use the link that's in the chat. Make sure you sign in. Okay, now we'll get to the introductions. My name is Anna Kay. I am a behavior support specialist. I primarily work with our Zone 2 schools, but you might see me sprinkled in throughout other parts of the district. And I'm joined by the brilliant Molly Keys. She primarily supports Zone 1, but much like me, you might see her in other capacities. As behavior support specialist, we primarily support general education teachers. We offer support and guidance around behavior management, social emotional learning, positive behavior supports. So if you or a teacher at your school is kind of in need of some guidance or has some questions or needs a thought partner in this area, feel free to reach out to us. We're more than happy to help. And in fact, that's my favorite part of the job, is working directly with teachers. So before we dive into the content, I'm going to invite us to just take a moment to set our own intentions as adult learners in this space. I'm going to invite you to just take a few moments to either think to yourself or to write down on a piece of paper, if that's helpful for you, the answer to a few of these questions. So why did you choose this session? Why did you prioritize coming to this session today? And how would you like to show up for our work here today? What do you want to bring into the space, either mentally or physically, however that might look for you? I'm just going to give us about 30 seconds of silence to kind of make space for that. You don't have to share it. This can just be between you and yourself. I find this approach is helpful when working with adult learners, especially this year. We have been kind of thrown into this tradition where we are multitasking all the time, especially in this virtual space. So this might be, you might consider using this approach when you're working with the other adults at your school site, and asking them to just kind of take that quiet time to set an intention that can really help to ground us in the space. So with our intentions in mind, let's talk about why we're here today. Why on earth are we talking about social emotional learning in literature? So of course we know SEL is a priority across the district, across the nation, in our own classrooms, at our own school sites. This has to become really kind of the foundational piece of how we teach, right? And how we interact with students. We also know that SEL is most impactful and most effective when it is interwoven into every aspect of the day. Sometimes we might hear or see in classrooms that there's like an SEL time, right? Or SEL happens in morning meeting. And while I want to encourage us using morning meeting and using that space for SEL, I want to push back on the idea that it happens in isolation, right? I want us to really think about how we can begin to weave SEL into all interactions we have with students and the interactions they have with each other, with the interactions we have with the other adults at our school, and how we approach our work and how students approach their work. So today, we're going to show you one example of how this might look in your classroom, specifically how this might look in your literature block, recognizing that this is just one example, right? And there are a myriad of ways to weave SEL into our work. But we want to begin, this is going to be very familiar to many of you, but we just want to make sure we have kind of this foundational understanding of what do we mean by SEL. So CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, defines SEL as the process through which children and adults understand and manage emotions, set and achieve positive goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain and also repair positive relationships, and make responsible decisions. All too often, I think SEL becomes oversimplified as this idea that it's just talking about feelings. And in reality, that is a component of self-awareness. So I would say that is 1/5, or really less than 1/5 of the whole SEL model. That's a piece of it. But SEL really encompasses so many things, right? It's that self-awareness and self-management, social awareness and relationship skills, and also responsible decision-making. And here you will see, this also comes directly from CASEL. CASEL.org is their website, and they have broken down these 5 competencies into sub-skills. So I won't read over all of them, but you'll notice if we look at self-management, for example, CASEL shows us that self-management is the competency, but there are sub-skills that we have to build up within children and adults to achieve social emotional fluency in the area of self-management, right? So this is things like practicing impulse control and stress management, self-discipline, goal setting, etc. I'm going to just give us space to keep this slide up on the screen for a second so you can kind of take in all of these sub-skills. And I'm going to invite you to look at them through the lens of ELA, or literature, reading instruction. How might these skill sets look in your reading block? We'll just take a moment to look at that. And now I'm going to turn it over to Molly, because Molly has developed this incredible tool through which we can look at those competencies and those sub-skills using very guided questioning in read alouds. And I'm really excited for her to share that with you.
Anna is so incredibly kind and complimentary. I just hope that I can live up to that kind compliment. So we want to start out by thinking about why we're connecting SEL to literature. As Anna said, this is something that is integral in order to create deeper SEL instruction. And students really do learn a great deal by connecting and creating these deep connections to the characters in the novels and the stories that they read. I want you to think to yourself, who's a character in literature that you connected with? Think about your history as a reader, and think about who you have found these deep connections with and why. Why did those connections occur? For me, one of my very early connections that I formed with a character in a story was in this book, Hecate Peg. I don't know if many teachers know this book anymore, but when I was a very young person, my mom bought this story. Her name happens to be Peggy Sue, but Hecate Peg is the antagonist of the story. And the hero of the story is the children's mother. It's a story about these 7 children named Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and their mother, who is this kind, loving, single mom taking care of all of these kids in this rural, medieval ages sort of period. I connected deeply with that character because of her bravery, her ability to stand up against the odds and the challenges that she faced. I connected with her because I looked up to her because she reminded me of my own mother and all of these other reasons. And in essence, she showed me a lot about what a person can be. And to me, that's part of why we teach SEL. We teach SEL so that we can help students form these ideas of who they want to be and how we can get there. And the characters that we read about in books and in these stories can serve as exemplars for that growth, for the change that they go through, for all kinds of things. And so through the journeys that inspire and excite us, we can find those parts in ourselves and we can find those experiences that we can learn from. And we can find those failures, those successes, and we can connect them to SEL to create deeper connections that we can grow from. And that's sort of what inspired this work. Let me figure out how to go to the next slide again. There we go. So this is a tool that I like to say that Anna and I created because I would not have made this without collaboration with Anna. It's a reflection tool. And what this tool is it contains, actually, I skipped a slide, I'm sorry. Basic narrative structure. Apologies, everyone. So we started thinking through this whole process of building a reflection tool by thinking about the basic narrative structure. We all know that a narrative structure tends to follow this format of having an orientation that sets us up in a story, our rising action as our character heads towards that climax, that edge point where we tip over into that falling action space, and then our resolution. Character development follows this pattern in most stories that we read. Whether that's our main character or side characters, we see this pattern play out in narratives again and again and again, especially in children's literature in K through 5. At each point within this structure, we learn something about our character through their interactions with their world, through their interactions with other people, and through their actions with the problem that they're trying to solve. And by connecting the SEL competencies to each of these points, we can help students to reflect on their reading and build that social emotional intelligence at the same time. And so, as you already got a free preview of, that's exactly what we did. We took each of those sections, that orientation, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution, and we tied it to our social and emotional learning competencies. So on this tool, this specific one, we have all 5 competencies present here. But in the copy that you all have through the slide deck, it has not only this version, but a version that has each individual competency aligned with the story arc diagram. So there's a lot of ways that this tool can be used. First, it is a tool that can help us create those connections between text, SEL, and our students. But it can be used in read aloud discussions, which is something that we're actually going to do in a few moments. It can be something that you use in small group discussions in those reading groups that you hold. This can be something that can inspire journal responses or short answer assessments or even essay starters for some of our students who are prepared for that level of work. But this is really nice in essence because it helps us to be able to form strong questions that are reflective of the text and also connected with SEL at the same time. So no matter what we're reading, we can find questions using this tool that can help us to create those deep connections. So for example, if I'm going to read The Hobbit, that's a story structure that most of us know. We understand what happens in The Hobbit. So if we're in that orientation phase where we are hanging out in the Shire, learning about our Baggins character, and he's meeting all of this cast of characters, we can consider, what is Bilbo's self-awareness? How self-aware is Bilbo of who he is and what he wants in life? Are there parts of himself that he's not yet aware of? And we soon find out in that orientation that yes, there is. He does crave adventure. He wants something more out of life. He was just in a comfortable spot. And then we think about, well, how well does he manage himself? He manages himself extremely well. He is a character of self-control, and we can find evidence for that in the text. And now as we're reading this aloud, because it is a bit complex for especially our young readers to read on their own, but as we're reading this aloud, now I'm stopping and I'm saying to my students, wow, Bilbo showed some self-management there when all of these guys were throwing plates around and smashing his pots and pans and eating all the food in his cupboard. He showed a great deal of self-management. What is one thing that you saw him do that showed self-management? And so now using this tool, I can form some of those deeper questions. I can inform my readers better on the things that they should be reflecting on in the story to help them better understand the character. So we're understanding our characters in more depth, we're understanding their motivations, and we as learners are learning about these SEL competencies through the character's performance in their world. These are all things that I really find exciting about literature. This is why I was really excited to create this presentation with Anna, because SEL and literature can go hand in hand so beautifully, if only we have a little bit of guidance for ourselves for how to use it in the classroom. And so I encourage you to open up the slide deck and go to this slide to find that link right here. Click here to get your own copy, because once you do, it'll take you to a slide deck that looks like this. Now on this slide deck, you see that here's the image that I just showed you with all of those competencies. And on top it has that narrative structure arc. On the next page, well, this one is just focused on self-awareness. And there's some questions here to get you started. But there's also space for you to add questions around those same things, so that as you're planning read alouds with your students, as you are working on a text with your class, as you're working on a reading group, you can click here and add questions that are targeted specifically for what your students need in that section. So if I zoom into this self-awareness section, we have in Rising Action, for example, how does the character's awareness of themselves contribute to the story's conflict? So in many of our stories, we find characters that have no self-awareness. And that really does make it harder for them to navigate their world. And it makes a lot of conflict. I'm thinking Pippi Longstockings in particular. Her level of self-awareness is pretty low. And that really does cause most of the conflict in those stories. And being able to use that language with our students helps them to understand that narrative structure better. And it also, again, connects back to that social and emotional learning. So then when they're interacting with their own world, they can begin to reflect and say, well, my level of self-awareness in that moment wasn't great. Could that have perhaps caused that issue on the slide at playground? Could that perhaps have contributed to the issues I'm having with my friends? So now we're utilizing the text as not just that academic piece, but that piece for self-growth. And that's what I really love about stories like this. So now to go back to our main presentation. Here's the part, here's a part where it starts getting a little bit fun. We are going to read a story together. You are going to get to sit back and listen to a read aloud. Hopefully I get my read aloud skills back in order for this. And we're going to participate in a discussion afterwards using this tool and using questions from it, hopefully with good effect, and hopefully we'll all enjoy it. Today we're going to read the book, What Do You Do with an Idea? And I'm going to intentionally read it out to you, because one thing that I've noticed a lot lately is that we use a lot of YouTube and videos and things like that, and they're great. And using those for read alouds can be amazing. But every once in a while, sitting down and having the connection with someone of them reading a book to you can be a real pleasure. And it would be a pleasure for me to share this with you. So we're going to read the story, What Do You Do with an Idea? And as I read today, I want you to think about the story structure. I want you to consider what happens in that orientation. What do we learn in the orientation about our main character? What occurs in the rising action? Where is our climax? Where is our falling action? And then what happens in that resolution? So we're not just thinking about beginning, middle, and end, because a lot gets lost when we just think beginning, middle, and end. We're going to think about that whole arc and structure. And then when we're done, we're going to discuss the book using a reflection tool. So let's dive into What Do You Do with an Idea by Kobe Yamada. Where did it come from? Why is it here? I wondered. What do you do with an idea? At first, I didn't think much of it. It seemed kind of strange and fragile. I didn't know what to do with it. So I just walked away from it. I acted like my idea didn't belong to me. But it followed me. I worried what others would think. What would people say about my idea? I kept it to myself. I hid it away, and I didn't want to talk about it. I tried to act like everything was the same as it was before my idea showed up. But there was something magical about my idea. I had to admit, I felt better and happier when it was around. It wanted food. It wanted to play. Actually, it wanted a lot of attention. It grew bigger, and we became friends. I showed it to other people, and even though I was afraid of what they would say, I was afraid that if people saw it, they would laugh at it. I was afraid they would think it was silly. And many of them did. They said it was no good. They said it was too weird. They said it was a waste of time and that it would never become anything. And at first, I believed them. I actually thought about giving up on my idea. I almost listened to them. But then I realized, what do they know? This is my idea, I thought. No one knows it like I do. And it's okay if it's different and weird and maybe a little crazy. I decided to protect it, to care for it. I fed it good food. I worked with it. I played with it. But most of all, I gave it my attention. My idea grew and grew. And so did my love for it. I built it a new house, one with an open roof where it could look up at the stars, a place where it could be safe to dream. I liked being with my idea. It made me feel more alive, like I could do anything. It encouraged me to think big and then to think bigger. It shared its secrets with me. It showed me how to walk on my hands. Because, it said, it's good to have the ability to see things differently. I couldn't imagine my life without it. Then, one day, something amazing happened. My idea changed right before my eyes. It spread its wings took flight, and burst into the sky. I don't know how to describe it, but it went from being here to being everywhere. It wasn't just a part of me anymore. It was now a part of everything. And then I realized what you do with an idea. You change the world. And so now that we've read that lovely story, which is one of my favorite old read alouds from my classroom, I want us to think. And we're going to use that discussion arc and have a little talk. If you want to respond out loud, you can feel free to. If you want to respond in the chat, that would be lovely too. So let's go back to that orientation section, that very beginning. How self-aware would you say our character was? Do you feel like our character had a good sense of who they were and their own abilities? Do you think that our little boy was really faithful in his own ability at the beginning? Why or why not? So Jennifer says he didn't believe in his abilities. He was anxious about sharing this with others. And Anna mentioned that his self-awareness was shaped by what other people thought of him or would think of him. And Kelly agrees he wasn't really self-aware. He was unsure of what to do with this idea, so he tried to hide it. Yeah, that low self-awareness. And so now we're building in that, ooh, here's this castle idea, here's this structure from SEL, but I also see this beautiful attachment to the story's tale. So then in our rising action, we can think about, let's go with those relationship skills. I noticed in this story that there were some other people who had some ideas about his idea. So going back to that scene in that rising action, how were the characters' relationship skills in that part? Do you think that he had good communication with others and that he had strong relationships with other people? Or did he have some struggles? Ooh, he questioned himself. Yeah, he was looking for answers from others. Yeah, Annette, that's a really good point. And Anna, that's a really good point too, about that communication with others. Was that real or perceived? And that's often a question that we can ask ourselves of our student communication too. And it says, I was afraid they would think I was silly. And many of them did. They said it was no good. They said it was too weird. They said it was a waste of time and that it would never become anything. So what does that tell us about his relationships? Yes, Kelly, that's a great point. Some weren't receptive of his idea, but others did like it. And he was focused on that negative part. So as we're thinking about those relationship skills with communication and with our social engagement, those are things that we can think about. Like, if I'm building these healthy relationships, am I only focusing on those negative things, or am I trying to foster this positivity in my relationships? It's 100% within our SEL field. It felt that these outcomes would take place based on past experiences. Yeah. So then if we move on to that responsible decision making in that climax. So we had this crux point where he had struggled with, yeah, I like it. No, I don't. Yes, I like this idea. No, I don't. He was going back and forth and struggling with it. Then we have this crux point where he finally decided, despite how others felt, despite what he'd experienced previously, he was going to love this idea and he was going to go all in. And that's really our climax. How did the character use their decision-making process to get to that point? What did he do? Did he analyze his situation and come to a good conclusion? Did he reflect on how he felt? What did you notice? And just to refresh our memory of it, the real crux point of this is this page. But then I realized, what do they know? This is my idea, I thought. No one knows it like I do. And it's okay if it's different and weird and maybe a little crazy. I decided to protect it, to care for it. I fed it good food, I worked with it, I played with it, but most of all, I gave it my attention. So that's the point where he really decides to go all in. And yeah, the idea still made him happy, so he kept it and continued to value it until it got bigger. And so that's where his responsible decision making comes in. He cares for it because he knows after analyzing the situation, after listening to others and evaluating it, it does make him happy. Yeah, and he began the story with that negative self-concept, and by spending time with this idea, it began his own growth. Beautiful. So then in our falling action is where we see some change in the character now. After our character's been through this journey, we see change. So now that the character has grown, do we think that the character's probably experienced some of this social awareness change and relationship skills change? Those people don't come back and we don't see them again, so it's hard to tell. And some stories, all of these questions fit with better than others. But we can think about it in terms of his relationship with his idea, maybe. So in that relationship skill with his idea, in these social awareness skills towards his idea, what's changed? How has he grown in these skills in terms of his relationship and working with this other character of his idea? Yeah, he nurtures that idea and begins to take care of it. So that's really an empathizing and respect and caring action that he's doing. He's understanding what his idea needs and he's giving it to him. Beautiful. And so then as we get to that resolution, and Kelly just posted, he built his idea a house with an open roof, and eventually we learn his idea was accepted and appreciated by others because he states it wasn't just my idea anymore. That's a really great statement too, Kelly. And then that brings us to that resolution piece. So now in this resolution, how has his self-awareness as a character changed because of this journey? Does he have a better idea of who he is? And does he maybe believe in his own abilities more? And how do you know?
Could you reread those last 2 pages?
Absolutely. Thanks for asking, Kelly. All right, those last 2 pages. I don't know how to describe it, but it went from being here to being everywhere. It wasn't just a part of me anymore. It was now a part of everything. And then I realized what you do with an idea. You change the world.
I think he really just opened it up to kind of like an open-ended, he now realizes that every idea can be grown into something bigger, and so he won't stop coming up with ideas.
Oh, and that's beautiful. And now that really feeds into his like self-efficacy, doesn't it? He now has this belief in himself and his own ideas and what comes from him. That's a really interesting way to put it. Then Madison added in, I think he set goals at the end, and I agree. I think that now that he's reached that resolution, he's got this ability now to set these goals and to aim for them, which I think is really beautiful. So thank you all so much for participating in that with me. I really appreciate it. And I think it's, at the very least, it's a little bit of a proof of concept for how this can be used. But now I'm going to pass it off to Anna for our next part.
All right. We are going to give you the opportunity to learn from one another. We appreciate you taking this time to sit and listen. I, for one, really enjoy being read to, so that was a treat to hear Molly read aloud. But now we're going to put you into breakout rooms. So I have those all set up, and here in just a moment, you'll be sucked out. You'll be in randomized breakout rooms. So the hope is you have various voices from various perspectives, maybe some educators that work with our younger population all the way up through our 5th grade educators as well. And on this next slide, you're going to see the discussion prompts for these breakout rooms. Now, your discussions are absolutely not limited to this, but these might be some ways to frame your discussion. So we're going to ask you to think about, how would you use this SEL story arc, this structure, in your classroom? What modifications would you make so that it fit the unique needs of your students? And finally, what books do you already have or already use that you could utilize specifically with this tool? That question is my absolute favorite, because I know as educators, we're always excited to share books. So my hope is that part of the discussion helps you to connect with one another, but also to get some new book titles. So you have access to this slide deck. You can pull up these discussion questions, but if you haven't opened it, we'll just give you a minute to screenshot those. You'll be in these breakout rooms for 10 minutes. Let me just make sure that everybody has a buddy or a couple buddies in their room. Okay. And before we release you, what questions do you have for us? Okay, if you have a question, if one comes up, Molly and I will stay in the main room. You're welcome to come back. We will pull you back in at 10:08, not 10. Oh goodness, I just sent us back in time. At 1:18. We hope you enjoyed this time together. See you soon. Just making sure every room has a couple people. Looks like it. Awesome.
Welcome back, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So before we close out, I wanted to have a quick check-in and hear from all of you about your discussions. So while you were in your discussion groups, I want to hear kind of what was this whole experience like for you and what connections did you build? Deborah.
All right, can you hear me? We lost how to do this again.
I can hear you.
Okay, I think that you two are genius people. I like how, because our staff tends to think that all of us, including myself, that we just talk about our feelings and we integrate morning meeting and we're good to go. And I like how this takes us to the next level with character, like text to self. And I had a great breakout room and a discussion with different ideas on books. Like our school just acquired some books from the EDL department, and we can integrate a lot of those and then also have the multicultural touch to it. And yeah, so thank you. Appreciate today's presentation.
Awesome. One of the books that was recently in the last few years distributed by the Cultural Equity Department is actually Island Born, which is a book that I was going to read aloud today, but decided not to because it's a bit long. And I think that this is a book that connects beautifully to this method. So if you have Island Born, I highly recommend reading it and using it for this kind of method because it's excellent. And if you haven't read Island Born, be ready for some tears. And it's a beautiful book. Lovely book. That's great. Thank you, Deborah, for sharing. Anyone else? Yes, Jennifer.
One thing that, I'm sorry. One thing that my group discussed was your kids might not be at the point where they can do all of these steps at once. So definitely scaffolding. I mean, they might not know, like just when I was talking about the feelings that the character might have, just brainstorming like lists of feelings before you even start the book. And they might not be there yet, but not to give up. And not trying to tackle everything at once. Candace had a great idea of like pausing partway through the book, stop and talk. And I know for time reasons, and she said this as well, like you probably needed to do the whole book to give us the full experience. And so just being flexible with our teaching and addressing it to our needs and our kids.
Yes, those are some excellent points, Jennifer. So that flexibility is highly useful for this. So for example, if you're reading a longer chapter book, you're not going to get through each of these steps in that. There's no way. But like if I'm reading the BFG to my class and I'm in the section of the orientation or the climax or whatever it might be, I can use those questions to guide the discussion as I'm reading along. So that was another point too. Like I did choose not to do the questions along the way today, but that is something that I feel like is a better instructional strategy, right? To be able to stop and reflect in the moment and continue on and connect it as you're going. So yes, the scaffolding, the connections, all of that. Beautiful comments. I love that discussion. And by the way, did anyone come up with any new books that they would want to connect with this strategy? Because that's one of the reasons why I wanted to make sure that we debriefed, because you all have beautiful libraries of your own, and sharing those among each other, I think, is one of the best ways that we can connect in a lot of ways.
In our group, we talked about implementing this with our One School, One Book program that we have. Again, ours is a chapter book, so like you said with the BFG, it'll have to be broken down. But one book that I really recommend is Mr. Peabody's Apples by Madonna. It's a really good one.
That is
surprisingly good.
Typing Mr. Peabody's Apples by Madonna. I love that book.
Me too.
Love it, love it, love it.
Oh, those are great ideas. And someone, Holly in the text just typed in Google Doc and created with this in mind a list of books. And I actually think that's a great idea, but also we have some really comprehensive book lists on the BSS Teens SEL modules. So if any of you are familiar with our modules, that's a great place to start, because we have in those SEL modules book lists for different grade levels. And any of those books really, or most of them, can be used for this kind of context. So if you haven't checked that out yet, I highly recommend it. You can find it through the TLN website by just navigating to the BSS page and then down over to our modules. Highly recommend it. And yeah, that Mr. Peabody's Apples is pretty great. So I'm really glad. Oh, and A Chair for My Mother, beautiful. And Anna just posted the SEL module link in the chat as well. So great options. And A Bad Case of the Stripes, really good. Another one that I really love is Looking for Atlantis. If you haven't read this book, I highly recommend it. Kids love it because the pictures are so intricate. But the story itself, here's some of the artwork from the book itself, super duper intricately illustrated. But the book itself is about a child experiencing grief after the passing of his grandfather and exploring the legacy, essentially, that his grandfather left behind through story. It's a beautiful text, and I highly recommend it. But any of these books are really wonderful. Even some of the classics that we have in our classrooms, like The Three Little Javelinas, can connect beautifully. Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day. We all know this one. Oh, and one that I almost read, Tiki Tiki Tembo. I only didn't read this one because I knew it would get stuck in my head, as it probably already is. And another one that I almost read, Mufato's Beautiful Daughters. This is one of my all-time favorite multicultural stories, and it's a great text for this as well because of the character growth that's experienced throughout. We learn a lot about the motivations of these characters, and that connects beautifully with SEL. Anything else that anyone wanted to add into the discussion about what came from your breakout groups?
Well, one of the things that we shared in our breakout group is it doesn't matter how old the kid is, middle school, high school, elementary school, kids love picture books. And you can do anything at so many different levels with a picture book with students.
That is a beautiful point. I even remember being a high schooler and being super excited when a teacher brought out a picture book to read to us. It was really lovely. She read to us. We enjoyed the picture book altogether, and it was kind of uplifting in a lot of ways. We all benefit from those experiences. And these picture books really do have a lot going on in terms of story structure, conflict, and motivation. And each one is like a little bite into what a whole story arc can be, while a chapter book has all these extra pieces, right? We're enjoying mealtime and learning about how this family experiences mealtime together. And then we're going back to this magical world of blah, blah, blah. And it's got a lot going on. A storybook is really distilled. And so we can even sometimes see more of these connections to SEL because of the way that they're distilled. So it's a really, really great point. And then in the chat, Children's Lit was my favorite in a college course. It was one of my favorites too. It really does work magic. And yeah, using the plot roller coaster graphic organizer. Yes. And enjoying the ride with characters with SEL in mind. I really like that idea of going on this ride with characters with SEL. I love that idea. That sounds like a lot of fun. Anna.
Reading Deborah's comment made me think, right, this visual of the roller coaster, and it made me curious if maybe a teacher could create that visual, but then also have images that correlate back to those 5 castle competencies, to kind of encourage students to think about each of those pieces as they're reading, right? So that would help our English language learners. It would also help our little ones, right, to kind of have a visual connection between the SEL competency and what that might look like and sound like, and the plot roller coaster. It would also be a good reminder for our older kids, or maybe something a class could create. But Deborah, thanks for planting that idea in my brain.
And Deborah, if you end up making that, make sure to send it our way because I want to see that. And with that, I think it's a good time for us to come to a close. Thank you all so much for your participation and your attendance today. I was nervous about this session. I haven't been nervous about a PD in a really, really long time, but I was nervous today. And I think it's because this was kind of like Anna said earlier when you were all in breakout groups, this is kind of like me showing my idea. And I really appreciate the warm reception and the feedback and all of that you've all shared. So if you'd like to continue this conversation, then please feel free to reach out to us. Our email addresses are on the screen, and we're also on Twitter at APS Team. So if you use any of this in your classroom and you take some pictures, feel free to tweet about it, and the BSS team will probably retweet it. And again, thank you all for being here today and spending this valuable time with us. I hope you have a great rest of your week.
14 days.